Today we're going to discuss The Mandalorian, Jon Favreau, and how he says it will lead into the sequel trilogy, something we all knew was going to happen since day one. I don't understand why anybody thought differently, why they thought that it wasn't going to lead, that this show was going to retcon the sequel trilogy. It's not going to happen, folks. That anything along those lines is just... I don't understand where you would, how you would think that Disney made billions of dollars off this. No, I'm not taking it for Disney. The sequel trilogy was garbage. Force Awakens was simply A New Hope reskinned and gutted. The Last Jedi was the worst Star Wars movie ever made. And The Rise of Skywalker was a cobbled together Frankenstein's monster made by J.J. Abrams, who was probably upset that he couldn't just mystery box the entire movie, which he tried to.
May the Force be with you.
Anyway, The Mandalorian, we'll talk about this article. So sit back, relax, get a beverage, let's go. Jon Favreau confirms The Mandalorian will match up to the Disney sequel trilogy, also claims viewers influence continuity decisions. Oh, that's so funny. I remember a couple of years ago when everybody thought that Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni were the saviors of Star Wars. They were going to single-handedly resurrect it from the ashes of Disney, and it would be restored to its once great majesty. No, it's never going to happen. Disney owns it. This is what you get, and deal with it, I guess, or just don't watch like most of us. But don't watch it after you say you're going to boycott it, and then review it on your channel.
Hypocrite!
Jon Favreau, head writer and producer of The Mandalorian, recently claimed that The Mandalorian will indeed lead into Disney's Star Wars sequel trilogy. And again, who was doubting that this would happen? What? Do you think just because they made a show that was not shit, that they were going to forget about the sequel trilogy? It's just sheer fucking hubris to think otherwise. That's cognitive dissonance to think otherwise. It truly is. I don't understand how people got to that conclusion other than wishful thinking, which, yeah, for a split second in time, in season 1 of The Mandalorian, I was like, damn, they might actually, and then you're like, no, they're not. They're not going to do that. They're not going to shirk their own IP. They're not going to shrug aside all the money they made on these movies, and just because a few fans are like, we don't like this, they're going to redo it. It's not going to happen.
Not gonna happen! No, not gonna happen!
In a recent interview with YouTube channel Movie TV promoting the new season of The Mandalorian, Favreau was asked, you spoke about needing to have a team to keep track of all the continuity that you got going. Is it challenging also as a storyteller, knowing where this universe, the galaxy of Star Wars, is like 20, 25 years down the road in terms of the sequel trilogy and having to match up with that? I guarantee you that question, they were like, you have to ask him about this so he can validate the sequel trilogy. That was probably a question that they were like, hey, if you want Mr. Favreau to come on, you have to ask him this question so he can build up the sequel trilogy. That's, things like that happen. You know, don't think that things like that don't happen in interviews. Favreau answered, yeah, it's a little closer than that now. We've been on the air a little bit. It's interesting because, you know, what comes before, and then in our time period, there's also been extended universe fiction, Favreau continued. There's characters that have been slowly introduced into Star Wars Rebels, like Thrawn. There's a lot of stuff that's in canon, like canon proper. But I think there's different tiers and things. Next, he indicated that they look at what's canon based on audience reaction. We really look to the fans to see what they embrace to. It's not like a science. There's definitely conversation that's going on. Favreau also expressed he's looking past the sequel trilogy despite current Disney Star Wars canon not extending past the sequel trilogy. And then also what happens after the sequel trilogy, because the sequel trilogy only takes place over the course of a few years. It's a big thing on the screen and it's very eventful, but it's relatively brief moment in history over the course of thousands of years that Star Wars takes place. And so what happens after is interesting too. And I know there's some discussion, exploration going on about what happens after it, he added. Yeah. So the sequel trilogy, like they said, it only takes place over a brief period of time in a huge existing universe. Now, Kathleen Kennedy said at one point that the Star Wars doesn't have books and comics to look on like Marvel does. They don't have that luxury. And it's like, well, you shouldn't have thrown out the entire extended universe. But now they're cherry-picking characters. Ahsoka Tano, Thrawn, you know, the Rebels, which I never watched Star Wars Rebels. What I have regularly, I've seen a couple episodes here and there. What I have seen, I hate it. I thought it was stupid, and I didn't like the characters. I didn't like any of it. So not something I'm looking forward to seeing. Ahsoka Tano, even in the Clone Wars show, not one of my favorite characters. I didn't mind her in Mando, but like again, not one of my favorite characters. She's just one of those characters I could do without seeing because I don't care. Favreau continued to explain how he looks at Star Wars continuity. So I think that there are certain markers that we have. It's almost like studying ancient history, where you kind of know a few things that happened, but there's a lot of murkiness in between, and we just don't have archaeological evidence in the real world to know exactly what happened, so we kind of connect the dots. If you look at someone like George R.R. Martin and his novels, it's really interesting to see how he treats these things because he really does treat it like history, Favreau went on. Sometimes you have stories told from different perspectives. Sometimes you have flawed storytellers. Sometimes you have different versions. And of course, you have different media, the books and the shows, and that interplay and the level of sophistication. And I think also having somebody like one author of it really adds to the complexity that you can have.
Complex?
He concluded. So how do we emulate that with the teams that we have at both Lucasfilm, ILM, and on the team of our shows? How do we all work together to try to formulate that kind of consistency? The fact that we're looking past the sequel trilogy could indicate that Grogu and Din Djarin's story will continue past the events of the sequel trilogy, and thus they would be dealing with a galaxy once again finding itself in the middle of chaos, with the New Republic's core planets wiped out by the First Order. The First Order's quick rise to dominance throughout the galaxy, the usurpation of the First Order by Darth Sidious, and then the Sidious death and destruction by members of the Resistance. It's possible that Mandalorians could fill the power vacuum left by the destruction of the New Republic, the First Order, and Darth Sidious's Sith forces. As for Favreau's comparison of Star Wars canon to ancient history, it really doesn't hold water given there are clear documents, namely George Lucas' original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, that Star Wars canon has as its foundations. Disney also made clear they were sidelining expanded universe in favor of their own continuity that included Lucas's films and the Clone Wars animated series. A blog post from 2014 on StarWars.com detailed, while Lucasfilm always strived to keep the stories created for the EU consistent with our film and television content, as well as internally consistent, Lucas has always made it clear he was not beholden to the EU. He set the films he created as the canon. This includes the 6 Star Wars episodes and the many hours of content he developed and produced in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. These stories are the immovable objects of Star Wars history, the characters and events to which all other tales must align. As for Favreau's comments about Star Wars stories having different perspectives, flawed storytellers, or different versions, it really doesn't make sense given the films are considered canon by moviegoers, as noted above by Lucasfilm in 2014, albeit given Favreau's comments, it appears they don't actually hold that opinion anymore. Nevertheless, what happened in the films was indeed canon. Outside of Lucas special editions, there are not other Star Wars movies that tell the stories of Luke and Anakin Skywalker from different perspectives or from a flawed storyteller. The events shown in the films are not only presented as fact, but are taken as fact by moviegoers as well. Luke Skywalker did indeed blow up the first Death Star by trusting the Force. Anakin Skywalker did slice off Mace Windu's hand and then become Darth Vader. As StarWars.com put it, these are immovable objects of Star Wars history. It's possible these comments might be interpreted and that he and Lucasfilm might retell the sequel trilogy from a different perspective or offer an alternative to it. However, as noted above, he made it clear the show will match up to the events of the Disney sequel trilogy. We've been saying this for years. There is no escape from the Disney sequel trilogy. They set the bar. They set the tone with that. That's where this is all leading to. That's why nothing that happens here matters, because we already know how it ends. It's like Rogue One. Oh, great. We introduce all these characters nobody cared about because we all know they die. Because we know that they can't move forward because we know how episode 4 starts. A New Hope, or the original Star Wars. This is the ridiculousness of people that are living in a fantasy world. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Star Wars as we know it in the modern age is dead. The Mandalorian is only good when put next to the current product. You stack it up with the sequel trilogy, it's obviously better. People saying Andor was boring. And he was a character that I don't care. I dug, like a couple episodes. I'm like, I can watch this. And after that, I was just like, this is so boring. It's so boring. Again, this is like having a kid. It's like, you know, I let him, he watched it with his mom, my wife. I was like, I'm not watching it. You can watch it with him. So she watched it with him. I was like, I don't like it. It's boring. I'm not watching it. So, folks, what do you think? I mean, do you agree with Favreau? I mean, we all knew it was leading to the sequel trilogy. Are you still watching any Star Wars? Are you watching The Mandalorian? I'm not. I watched the first episode, and I have no desire to go back. He didn't bring it up this morning, so we're just going to let sleeping dogs lie and not watch it. And yeah, I wanted to cover this article, kind of like I said, gauge what the community thinks about it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Smack the like button, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, all that. You can join as a channel member if you like. If not, cool, just subscribe. It's free. It always will be. I'm Etep from the Place to Be Reviews. I've been here with all these. If I don't see you, have a great day, a pleasant tomorrow, and I'll catch you on the next one.
It's better to burn out than to fade away.
I could do this all day.
This doesn't bode well.
You're lying. I never hit you. You are tearing me apart, Lisa.
No tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.